Hey, it's Mr. Peterson again, and we still have so much to talk about cells because their cells are so important. Uh, this screencast is about membranes, and membranes create boundaries. They create barriers for things to be isolated, so we can have specific chemical reactions happening within cells that are not influenced by the outside environment. So they really create a barrier. That's really the big thing. Here's a picture of an amoeba. I like this. I like this video because we don't really get an appreciation for how fluid our membranes are. I mean, yeah, you can grab some, you can feel it's kind of flexible, yeah, but we really don't get an appreciation for how fluid membranes are because pretty much all of our cells are stuck together. I mean, I think that's a good thing that our cells are stuck together. If they were falling apart, that'd be bad, I think. No, not I think it would be bad. So if we look at this amoeba and we watch its membrane, because that's what's surrounding, this is one cell. That's what's surrounding that one cell is membrane. And look at how fluid it is. And, it's moving. And our membranes do the same, just in a little more localized fashion. But this is an amoeba that's, its membranes are just flying all over the place as it's just driving its pseudopods wherever it's going in search of food. Cell membranes are composed of phospholipid bilayers. So there's a biochemical term, lipid. So lipids, this is lipid, this whole layer of this membrane is lipid. And lipids, as you know, are nonpolar. Hopefully you remember that. Nonpolar, and so that they really create an impermeable barrier to water. And think about how much our cells are made of. They're mostly made of water, but we isolate the water and the reactions that happens in the water with these bags of phospholipids. And a cell membrane has two major functions. I've already kind of alluded to some of that. It's going to form a barrier between the inside and outside of cells, but not only the inside and outside of cells, but also those organelles that we find inside of eukaryotic cells. It's also going to be a barrier to isolate and localize the chemical reactions that happen in those. And it's also going to control the passage of materials. This molecule down below here, here's a protein, and look at it as an opening. I mean, this is a cross section. Here's an opening, a pore inside of that protein that's going to regulate what goes in and out of that cell. And there's some cool stuff that happens with those protein channels. So again, inside, outside, or outside, inside, either moving in or moving out. Phospholipids. Here's a scale model of a phospholipid. It has a polar charged head, and then non-polar fatty acid chains. So this likes water. It's hydrophilic, and this doesn't like water. It's hydrophobic. And phospholipids hang out in membranes like this. So it's a bilayer, two, right? Two. And so we put these fatty acids like this back to back, and they're creating an impermeable barrier to water. And the phosphate ends are hanging out facing the water either inside or outside of the cell. So here's a little scale diagram of it. That phosphate is charged. It has a phosphate group, which is a polyatomic ion, has a negative charge. And the fatty acid tails, if you remember from the biochemistry unit, those are nonpolar. So they don't have any charge at all. So they don't like water at all because water is charged. Water, polar molecule, fatty acids, nonpolar. So they go like this. Water hangs out here. Positive charges hang out with the negative charges. Here's a little animation that shows how they're put together, the phospholipid bilayer. So you'll notice that the fatty acid residues, those chains are facing one another. And here's the polar, these are the polar ends of the molecule. These other things that are in the middle, these are cholesterols. That's a lot of cholesterol in the membrane. Cholesterol is important because it keeps membranes fluid, keeps them from packing in too tight. So cholesterol is really useful for that. Too much cholesterol in your body, though, builds up in your. And, that's another screencast. That's something else to talk about some other time. There's lots of things embedded in this membrane, and that's why it's called a fluid mosaic. Mosaic. You've probably built mosaics out of like eggshells, or I don't know what you have, but the whole thing is pieced together like a puzzle. Probably most membranes are something on the order of 70% phospholipid. 70%. And the other 30% are either carbs or proteins. And that varies from cell to cell and what the cell function is. But the majority of the constituents, the parts of a cell membrane, are phospholipid. So here are some of the pieces of the parts that we find in cell membranes. We have proteins, and here's one that's embedded in the membrane. Here's a channel that I've already alluded to. It's going to let things in and out. Some proteins don't go all the way through. We have carbohydrates that are on the outside of cells, and their job is to help cells identify one another. I already talked about cholesterol a little bit. Cholesterol's job is to keep membranes fluid so that they can move around, because these proteins are active. They're not just parked in one spot. So this animation shows the fluid mosaic model, and I think that the thing that's interesting is that it shows the molecular motion of things. The phospholipid bilayer, things are moving and vibrating back and forth. Here's the phospholipids, which are nonpolar, so they're facing each other. So there's those two terms: hydrophilic and hydrophobic, water-loving and water-fearing. And then we throw some proteins into the midst of all this. And some proteins, if you look at this guy probably has some hydrophobic ends. Those are hydrophobic amino acids, because you remember proteins are chains of amino acids that are anchored in that and kind of act like an anchor that keeps it in there. But this part of the molecule, this peripheral part of the molecule, is probably hydrophilic, and so it likes water, so it'll hang out there. This part of the protein, this is a protein that can span both inside and outside of the membrane. And here we have non-polar parts of the protein. Think back to the tubers and the tacks and how you built those structures and the way that they arranged themselves. Remember, those hydrophobic ones all stuck together. But the animation, things in this fluid mosaic model are moving, so the membrane is not static. The pictures in our textbook are just static, but membranes are constantly in motion, remodeling themselves for whatever function it happens to be. Cell membranes are selectively permeable. They decide what goes in and out of the cell. Some molecules can't cross the membrane. Why do you think that is? I want you to think about that one. What would limit the movement of material across a membrane? That's because that's a big question. Why can some things go in and some things can't? So here's the motion. We can watch the molecules. So on this side of the membrane, looks like this has the ability to go in there, but these guys don't. Whatever these molecules happen to be. I wonder why that is. Interesting question. Something to think about with regards to cell membranes. All right, so just a quick review. Membranes make compartments inside and outside of the cell. They separate cells from their environment. They also separate different parts of the cells from different parts of the cells. They're made of phospholipids. There are ends that are polar. They like water. There are nonpolar, so those fatty acid tails. Back to that, really good, nice scale model here. Nice polar ping pong ball and pipe cleaner fatty acids. And they're fluid and they move. So they're not static. They're moving all over the place. And that's important for their structure and their function. They're selectively permeable. Permeable means to let things go in or out. And so they select based on some characteristics: size, charge, shape, polarity of the molecules trying to get in. We'll do some activities related to that. And then they have components with functions. Those proteins are there for a reason. Proteins are there to be gatekeepers, or they are actually gates, or they might be receptor molecules to catch other molecules to turn things on inside the cells. All kinds of reasons. And membranes are cool. Yeah, so we got carbohydrates, cholesterols, proteins. The list could go on and on and on and on and on. So membranes are more than just the phospholipids. Remember, mostly phospholipids, like 70-80%, but then carbohydrates, proteins, cholesterols, those kinds of things as well. I borrowed a couple of animations. That's where I got those from. So anyway, membranes, important stuff.